Hello, everybody. It's really great to be back here at the Brussels Forum. I think the last time I was here, transatlantic relations were boring. And it's great to see all you friends. Now, I promised Karen and the other organizers that I would end this talk on a positive, uplifting note, and I will do so. But first, right before I got on the plane yesterday to come here, I had just submitted a manuscript to my publisher about the liberal world order, and the title of that manuscript is The Jungle Grows Back. And what I mean by that, and what I want to talk about today, is that the liberal world order that we have been living in since 1945, and that many of the nations around this room took part in building, is not a normal situation. It's a historical aberration. If you think about the many qualities or the key qualities of that order and compare it to all the rest of history, certainly recorded history, and I imagine going back much beyond that, each one of these elements is unique. So for instance, what we all know, the spread of democracy. It's been a democratic era. There are 100 democracies or more today, and there have been growing numbers of democracies ever since the beginning of the order. If you go back through history, of course, there are almost no democracies. It's almost like when democracies appear, it's an accident. So this is an entirely different period than anything we've seen before in that regard. Also in terms of prosperity, the kind of growth that we've seen since 1945, sort of in the neighborhood of 4% annually, global GDP growth. Well, I mean, global GDP growth throughout history was roughly zero. Most people have lived in extreme poverty. Most people have lived under tyrannies. And finally, most people have lived in eras when the great powers or empires or states were almost in constant warfare. War is the norm in human history, not peace. And in this period, we've certainly had wars, but we haven't had the kind of great power conflicts, the wars among the great powers that throughout history have caused so much destruction, especially in the first half of the 20th century. So all these things and others make this liberal order not only unique, but as I say, an aberration. It's not the norm. And yet, because of the great success that we had in this period, a lot of it was masked by the Cold War, which in my view, historically, is a kind of sideshow to the development of this liberal order, if you think in terms of historical significance. But the order was so successful, and we are such children of the Enlightenment, that we came to believe that all these things were not an aberration, but rather a new norm, the consequence of human progress, the inevitable evolution of humankind toward better behavior. If you read people like Steven Pinker today, it's just this, we're just better people than in the past. And I think we lost sight of what it took to create this international order and what an act of defiance of history and even defiance of human nature in many respects this order has been. We like to think, and we convinced ourselves, and this was the theme of the end of history, which, it wasn't just Frank Fukuyama who thought that human beings naturally aspire to recognition and respect for their rights and their freedoms, and that ultimately, if these things continue to play out, that democracy is the end point of human history. I think today we can see what we should have known all along, which is that's an incomplete description of human existence. Human nature contains many aspirations, many fears, many dark sides, and at various times, human beings are at least as prone in times of insecurity, and not just physical insecurity, but cultural insecurity, human beings are at least as prone to want to seek strong leadership, to exclude the other, to revert to tribe, family, and nationalism. Human beings have spiritual needs, which, as we all know, for all the great things that liberalism and democracy do, they don't answer a lot of the questions and needs that human beings have. And so what we really are dealing with and have always dealt with is an ongoing struggle within the human soul between these competing impulses. And how that struggle turns out depends very much on the kind of global situation, the national situation that exists in which people operate. Similarly, that we ever convinced ourselves, as we did, especially here in Europe, that geopolitical competition was something that was in the past, and now it was all about geoeconomics, and now it was about international institutions and cooperation. I'm sorry, the nature of the international system in normal times is one of constant geopolitical competition. So we took as a new norm what was really a very strange, unusual set of circumstances that, and I want to emphasize this, we had created. We created the circumstances in which this order could take place. And now I apologize in advance. I'm about to say positive things about the United States. Prenez garde, as Churchill said. The United States played, after World War II, the central role in making this order, in laying the foundations for this order. It did so in cooperation with others. It was vitally important that other peoples participate, but it was the ability of the United States after World War II essentially to put an end to two major cycles of conflict in the two most critical parts of the world, Europe and East Asia. Ever since the late 19th century and the unification of Germany, there had been an almost endless cycle of conflict in Europe. And similarly, ever since the Meiji Restoration and the growth of Japan to become a major power, it led to continual conflict. And what the United States was able to accomplish, and really it was able to accomplish it because it had a unique capacity to do so. Its geographical situation, its wealth, the fact that it did not have to worry about attacks from its near neighborhood allowed it to deploy large quantities of its troops overseas permanently and thereby put a cork in these conflicts. And that, in my view, set up the possibility for everything that we see. It's not that the United States did it, it's that the United States created the opportunity for it. The fact that Japan and Germany were taken, basically gave up traditional geopolitical ambitions and channeled their energy into economic growth and economic success, the betterment of their own people, because the military option that had gotten them and everybody else in so much trouble had been denied them, that created in those regions the possibility for everyone. It liberated everyone, including the Germans and Japanese and also their neighbors, to focus on non-traditional activities like simply economic growth without having to worry about the military struggles that had constantly plagued them in the past. And this was a critical factor in making this possible, making this amazing order possible. And unfortunately, this is, at least on the American side, what has been increasingly drifting away as the goal of American foreign policy. And I know we're obsessed with Trump. I certainly am obsessed with Trump. But this isn't just a problem of Trump. The role, and I think this needs to be emphasized, the role that the United States took on after World War II was unlike any role that any nation in history had ever taken on. Partly out of a sense of self-interest, but then I would say out of a sense of enlightened self-interest, the United States took on global responsibilities. I don't want to overstate the wonderfulness of America. The mistakes that we made, everyone knows about. But the one thing we continued to do throughout that period was to take international responsibility for maintaining peace and security and underpinning this order. It was a big and unusual load to carry. And I think, unfortunately, even though the original impetus had nothing to do with the Cold War, it was pre-Soviet Union when the United States set out on this task, because they were thinking about preventing what had happened in the past. Nevertheless, people associated it with the Cold War, and when the Cold War ended, Americans decided increasingly, or they asked, why in the world do they have to continue bearing this unusual, abnormal burden? You know, Jeane Kirkpatrick at the end of the Cold War said it was time for the United States to behave as a normal nation. Normal nations don't have global responsibilities. They have much narrower definitions of their interest. And I would say, beginning with the end of the Cold War, you can see increasing lack of enthusiasm for playing this role in every presidency. Every presidency had to begin by assuring the American people that they weren't going to be thinking about foreign policy, they were going to be thinking about domestic policy. And then, of course, Iraq and Afghanistan were the catalyst to sort of tip the consensus over, what had been the consensus. And I think that President Obama was the first post-consensus president. He rightly believed he was elected to offload this responsibility as much as possible. And the fact that Donald Trump could even be elected, absurd as that is at least shows you how little the American people cared about whether the United States continued to play this role, and they found his message that we wouldn't, that the liberal order was not in America's interests, compelling. And if you look at the 2016 election, only one candidate stood for the rest of continuing that old role, and she lost. And if she had won, I don't know that she could have turned American public opinion around. So that is a secular problem that we're dealing with. In addition, and I believe that it is at least partly responsible for much that has also gone wrong in other parts of the world. I think insofar as the United States looks like a less and less reliable maintainer of this order, it forces other nations to look more to themselves, to protect themselves. And no one is capable of stepping in and taking on the American role. No one has the power, the geography, the capability to do so. So what they will do, and what they are doing, is returning to normalcy. And I must say, when I look at Europe today, what I see is history and human nature returning. I put tremendous amount of blame on the United States for not putting a lid on the Syria crisis, which then led to this massive immigration flow, which has had such a major impact on European democratic institutions. But I think it would be foolish to think that what is happening in Europe could never have happened. In a way, probably it was inevitable, just as the rise of the increasing competitiveness in Russia and China are inevitable. Just as I think if you looked at the broad sweep of history, Brexit was inevitable. What could be less surprising than Britain wanting to distance itself from the continent? And so we are really seeing history and nature reasserting themselves. And so let me just end with this note. We can do something about this. We effectively pushed back against history and human nature for 7 decades after World War II. And despite what everyone thinks, we still have the capacity to do so. The institutions that we set up after World War II are very potent and durable. It's very hard for China, no matter how rich it is, or Russia, which is not so rich, to undo this system unless we basically allow them to do it. We have the capacity to push back. We just need to understand that the pushing back has to start occurring. You know, we have two modes, it seems to me. We're either absurdly deterministically optimistic, that things are just heading in the right direction, all we have to do is sit back and watch. That was essentially the message of the end of history. Or we decide that we're in decline and there's nothing to do but enjoy the ride down. The truth is, and it's proven by what happened after World War II, where the world was in an infinitely more dire situation than it is in now, that people can fight back. And so we all have our jobs to do. We in the United States have to go back to trying to convince the American people and make them understand what the cost of all this is. And Trump may be helping in that regard. He may be, in his own way, making Americans see that again. And in Europe, please be as upset with the Trump administration as you possibly can be, and all the stupid things that he's doing which undermine the liberal order's compact, especially on trade. But Europe also must tend to itself, and not just in terms of increasing its strength, but going back and pushing for democratic values here on the continent of Europe. I think we've been far too permissive to countries that have slipped away from democracy, countries that are in NATO, countries that are in the EU, that we have they're allowed to stand up and declare their illiberalism. I think Europe needs to start taking those issues more seriously, as well as dealing with the rest of the panoply. So that's my up message. That's the up part of my message. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President of the German Marshall Fund, Dr. Karen Domfried.
Good afternoon and welcome to everyone to GMF's Brussels Forum. I am so grateful to Bob Kagan for kicking off the 13th edition of GMF's Brussels Forum. And Bob, as always, you were incredibly thoughtful and thought-provoking. And I think this message to all of us, pushing us to push back on things that we don't think are right and things that we think fly in the face of the international order that everybody in this room has contributed to building over the past 70 years, is in many ways the theme of this Brussels Forum. I think the responsibility of pushing back does fall to everybody in this room. And as you know, you're an amazing group of people. We have folks from the US government, from European governments. We have media representatives, folks from the private sector, folks from think tanks. I was told that altogether we represent 53 countries in this room, which is pretty powerful. We also have a fantastic bipartisan mix of congressional staff and congressional members who are part of this conversation as well. And the power in the room is strengthened by participants from our Young Professionals Summit. And they are going to help us make sure this debate isn't just among folks in my generation, but those of you who are going to be carrying this order forward. I also am really delighted because Richard Louis yesterday said, "Who knows what tomorrow is?" And I said, "It's International Women's Day." And I am delighted that we're welcoming a record number of women to Brussels Forum this year. You can look and notice that around the room. But the fact of the matter is, GMF has always been committed to issues of diversity and gender balance. And women have been making big impact on policy for a long time. And if you look at just our agenda today, we have Federica Mogherini, Rose Gottemoeller, Manisha Singh, Ana Gomez, Susan Ness, Michelle Flournoy, just to name some of those headliners. So women are leading today. And I don't know if she's in the room now, but a trailblazer has been Madeleine Albright, and she will be with us over these next couple of days. So I just want to make us all aware that today's a special day for a lot of reasons. So there are many of you who are here for the first time. Some people I don't know, which is great. And there are lots of you who have come to many Brussels Forum. And it's wonderful to welcome those of you back. And I see Bob Zelick, who's one of those people. We're glad you're back. So I now want to give a special word of thanks to our partners. We couldn't do this without the amazing group of partners that we have. We have our founding partners, Daimler and the federal authorities of Belgium, our strategic partner, Deloitte, our forum partners, Boeing, BP, the Brussels Capital Region, Centrica, Microsoft, and the OCP Policy Center, as well as our associate and dinner partners. And really, without any of these folks, Brussels Forum wouldn't be the success that it is. We also, this year, as you're going to see, have an Oxford-style debate on the main stage. And Intelligence Squared US is doing that with us. And we also have Politico as the official digital partner of Brussels Forum. So that is the team that makes this all possible. Now, we also this year have a great showing from our GMF trustees. And those trustees are led by the co-chair of our Board of Trustees, Mark Leland, and we are all inspired by his remarkable commitment to GMF. And beyond the board, the people who make the magic happen are my amazing colleagues who are scattered throughout the room, but they're really the folks who, at the end of the day, deserve the credit for Brussels Forum. So what are we trying to do at Brussels Forum this year? For those of you who've been here before, the forum, as you know, tries to be a place where diverse voices can be heard and we can generate some out-of-the-box ideas. The idea behind that is to have transatlantic cooperation flourish. And as Bob made clear, flourish is probably not the verb that would leap to mind today when we reflect on transatlantic cooperation. So we've tried to mirror some of what's going on in the relationship by reorganizing this room and creating a more intimate setting where we really hope there's a greater sense of conversation. We also think that it's a moment where action is necessary. I mean, of course, action is always necessary, but our sense is that in a time of uncertainty, in a time of growing divisiveness, in a time of distrust, complacency can be fatal. And what we'd like to do is play a small part in catalyzing new approaches to the challenges of our time. So the feeling is that we cannot afford just to talk, we can't just admire the problems, but that we need to come up with a plan of action. And that's the thinking behind this theme of revise, reboot, rebuild, strategies for a time of distrust. Trust is vital to meet any of these challenges. When we think about alliances, of course, alliances are based on interests and alliances are based on values, but they're also very importantly based on trust. And as we all know from our personal relationships, it's hard to build trust. It takes time to build trust, but it's not very hard to destroy trust. It can just take a series of ill-considered actions to destroy trust. And so that was the thinking behind that focus. If we think about trust and where we are today on that score, there's so many challenges. There's a loss of trust in our institutions, loss of trust in our politics, in our leaders, in our democracy. And that's shaking the core of that liberal order that Bob spoke so eloquently about, and the US role in that order. And so how do you build trust? You build trust through understanding, through cultural exchange, through art, through food, through shared experience. And so one of the other things you'll see this year is that we want to try to give some of that experience to you. So we're incorporating more experiential dinners, greater problem solving, deeper dives into the challenges to try to create that here. And so my challenge to all of you is that you use this opportunity so that when you walk out of the Steigenberger on Saturday afternoon, you're more focused and have some ideas for concrete action that you can take in your part of this world to try to rebuild trust and come up with action plans to address these challenges. So that is my message for all of you. That's what we're trying to do here at Brussels Forum this year. And with that, I am going to turn the baton over to Richard Louie, who some of you will know. We're lucky at GMF to have Richard as a fellow. He also, of course, is an anchor for MSNBC. And you'll be seeing Richard not only for the next conversation, but throughout Brussels Forum, because Richard is the one tasked with holding all of us accountable for actively engaging with the challenges we face today and also for providing concrete strategies for this time of distrust. So with that, Richard, please come on up.
Well, we all made it. We're here in Brussels, Belgium, and it's good to be with all of you. I cannot thank you, Bob. Great to hear from you. And Karen, thanks again for having me back. And it's always great to be around so many big brains, because I think just by osmosis, I'll get a little smarter and might be a better journalist along the way, maybe. Works for some, doesn't work for others. So all of you understand what our format is. And that is really to engage, to come up with some action items, some fix-its, some solutions, to take the theory to the action. That's what makes it so exciting in a place like this. And you understand what the theme is this year, which is Revise, Reboot, Rebuild, Strategies for a Time of Distrust. And what we're going to do as your facilitator, in between, I'll pop in, and I'll just ask you, what you come up with so far? What do we got? And then we'll put it up on the screen and do something exciting with it. Who's wearing red in the room? Any reason? IWD, International Women's Day. I went and bought this tie today. I had forgot to get my red tie, and I knew there was a reason why. And we're talking about very prominent and strong voices on this day, and I could not, of course, be part of the opening without mentioning Karen, who has been one of those strong voices. So Karen, big round of applause for Karen. We've also got, very uniquely this year, we've got 4 femmels. Anybody know what that is? Have you heard of manels? Panels with all men? Well, this year we have 4 femmels, which means 4 panels with all women. And look out for them. They're going to be fantastic. So these are sort of my guiding ideas behind what the theme is, right? Which is the RRR strategies, the triple R's. First off, anybody seen that new series called Ugly Delicious? All right, Ugly Delicious is a Michelin star chef that's decided, you know what, I'm just going to make food that may look ugly, but it tastes doggone good. So I want us to think about solutions that are ugly food. Solutions that tear down what the constructs might be, the culture that might surround it. And so that'll be one way to think about the action steps that we're thinking of today. Also, as a journalist, and there's many esteemed journalists in here, more esteemed than myself, David Ignatius, for instance, Mr. Clemens here as well, and many, many others, Jonathan Capehart, I could go on and on and on, is we like to ask the question, so what? So as you're thinking of these solutions, think about so what? How does that make sense? As opposed to it being a nice idea, very well thought out. So what? What does that mean to that person, that everyday person, when we ask that, so what? And then think of exact action steps. That's what we're going to do. So with that, I did the very same thing earlier on Tuesday. I'm going to pull out these little Post-its in here. I got all this stuff in my pockets. The Young Professionals Summit, which just finished hours ago, came up with some ideas, action plans that they would undertake starting Monday. This is the first one. Bringing sexy TTIP back. Write a blog about promoting free trade between U.S. and Europe. By the way, is that YPSer here that wrote that? There you go. Thank you. And these are some of the pledges they made to undertake starting on Monday. Let me give you another one. Let's go to the next what I'm going to do on Monday tip. You can move the slide forward. There, let's go this one over here. I'm going to work with the TILN Alumni Network to organize a transatlantic convening for black women in politics. Rebecca, are you here? Right over there. By the way, TILN stands for the Transatlantic Inclusion Leadership Network. So that's what Rebecca's going to do on Monday. And I've got another one over here. Invite all YPS to join the Youth Atlantic Treaty Association. John. John, are you here? Great. Thank you, John. Don't take that sitting down, right? Those are some of the commitments that they wrote on these Post-its just this morning. And so that's what a practical example of hopefully what we'll all come up together with are some of these practical examples of what we will do moving forward. Spot me. Danielle went through that very quickly. I've got a question to kick us off. So if you pull out your phones right now, just go with me real fast. That'd be great. This is a word cloud. So revise, reboot, rebuild, strategies for a time of distrust. So what I'd like you to do, this is very 2018, is write a hashtag slogan of the practical action step that is needed to achieve what this year's GMF Brussels Forum theme articulates. So you can make it as long as you like because it's a hashtag. Just go for it. Put it in there. Let's see what you get. You got 50 seconds to do that. Is that music? Bain, this is new. This is great. We got thinking music now. You want to get on up here and do a little jig? You can do that too. We've got some space. All right, so we've got some personal responsibility, IVCFH, keep it coming, hashtag dialogue, real, partnership, action. So as we move forward, verbs, great. Subject verbs and then objects or adverbs after, great too. But since we're talking about action, let's think that if possible, moving forward. Because we would really like to go through these over the next 3 days and give them their proper attention. Well, that's great. This is the way we're going to start. I will ask this very same question as we move forward today, tomorrow, and then on Saturday. So we'll be able to see how our thinking evolves, hopefully. All right, great. I would like to introduce you to a video. If you could please give your attention to the screens. This is an introduction to the theme of this year's Brussels Forum.
Old challenges remain, fresh ones have emerged. Newly elected leaders on both sides of the Atlantic have been vocal about shaking up the establishment. Change creates opportunity. It can equally beget uncertainty. Uncertainty has deepened into distrust. Distrust within and between nations. Distrust with all too real consequences. Government, business, the media, our fellow citizens. People no longer know where to look for truth and leadership. What seemed solid is now crumbling. We must work together to directly confront the challenging world we find ourselves in today. We need to seek solutions rather than aggravate volatile situations. We need to analyze the breakdown of trust within and between societies and find new ways to build strong partnerships and networks that support democratic ideals. Do we need to re-examine our thinking? What is our strategy to revise, reboot, and rebuild for a time of distrust?
And to kick off our conversations at this Brussels Forum with that very theme, I'd like us all to please give a warm, warm welcome to Federica Mogherini, the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Madam High Representative, exciting times, is it not?
Sure.
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
You're not getting boring.
Not at all. And it's going to get even more exciting as we go through this conversation. You saw what the theme of this Brussels Forum is. The idea of distrust, the idea of having to come up with ideas, the idea of the triple R's, right? Revise, review, reboot. Well, I didn't get that in order.
In different order.
That's right. It's very difficult for me, evidently.
Changing the order doesn't change the result.
That's right. Revise, reboot, rebuild. What is your idea to answer that objective?
Priority number one is to rebuild trust and understand we'll get out of this chaos only with cooperation. Mm-hmm. You know, I was actually here, I'm really at home, not just because I'm in Brussels, which is somehow now my second home, or if not first, but also because I was a fellow in the German Marshall Fund program.
Oh, when?
Back in 2007. I spent one exciting month in the United States.
So you're home.
I'm home.
Yeah.
I'm home, indeed. Yeah. And the lesson there was that after the Second World War, America understood that a strong Europe was in the interest of a strong America. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to go back to basics somehow and rebuild this sense of commonality, of being on the same side, of being part of the same identity. It's there, it will always be there, but maybe we need to reboost it a little bit.
Okay, let's say I give you one wish, one magic bean. What do you do with it?
Another 99.
You want 100 magic beans? Okay, well, what do you do with the first one then? How about that?
I would probably say end the war in Syria. It's a war that is going on for far too long. We're getting used to hundreds of people dying every day, children, women. We have been, as European Union, putting all our efforts on the humanitarian aid. We've been by far the largest donor inside Syria, in the neighboring countries, inside Europe. Mm-hmm. But as long as we don't really together work on a political solution for the crisis on the UN auspices, the crisis will continue, the war will continue. And to me, this is probably the number one wish I would like to see solved.
You've been very consistent in that. I remember when you would come to the cameras in December. It's exactly what you were talking about. Clearly a headline that we've been covering. Another headline that we're covering today is the issue of optics versus practical steps. And this is that debate of Brexit. If you pull open a paper today across the EU or in the UK, that is the question. There was a meeting, as you know, that happened yesterday over the recent weeks on this very topic. What is your thought in terms of what is next? How is it that you can find the right outcome of Brexit?
I think it will be more difficult for the UK to find out how the future will look like, rather than for us. I clearly perceived this exactly 1 year ago. We were together, 27 leaders of the remaining 27 member states, celebrating 60 years of the Treaties of Rome, where the European Union was somehow starting. And I saw there the click, the determination of the remaining 27 to relaunch the European Union, come together. And if you look at one single issue that has been always extremely difficult for Europeans to tackle together, European defense, last year we made what was not possible to be made in the previous 60 years on European defense. And we did it in cooperation with NATO as we never did before. This happened just after the decision on Brexit. And it was, I think, the first reaction to relaunch the unity of the Union. Because we simply realize that in the world of today, no country alone is big enough to face the challenges we're facing. And so our strength in Europe is our unity.
Staying in the EU, the Italian elections 4 days ago,
no.
something you might know about.
No, I live in Belgium.
You need a...
But don't ask me about Belgian politics, please.
Yes. You're going to places I will not go in this conversation. What does this trend now say? Because the last couple of Brussels forums, we've been talking about this nationalist movement, right? And unfortunately, we are still talking about it from some perspectives. For others, they are glad to be still talking about it. What did the election tell you about the movement?
What we've seen in Italy is a major shift to anti-system messages and forces. What I see is two main political elements coming up. One is the clear victory of the Five-Star Movement, which is a movement that has no political clear connotation. Mm-hmm. It's not center, right, left. It's a movement. So we'll find out. Am I diplomatic enough? On the other side, the other element, which is
indeed... How about
this?
Is it strong? Do you see it ebbing? Do you see it... Where do you see it?
But if I can... The other strong element we see coming up of these elections is the shift in the power balance within the center-right. Mm-hmm. We see the extreme right with the Northern League gaining power, and the sort of traditional right with Berlusconi, if you call it traditional, I don't know, everything is relative, coming down. And this is a major change in the Italian political landscape, change in power forces, relations within the right camp. I would not say more than that.
Okay, I understand. I'll ask the questions.
I said now more than in the last 3-4 days.
I got you. No, it's okay. It's all right. We're amongst friends, and I won't tell anybody.
Indeed. No, it's just between us.
Just between the two of us. So it's what, almost 3:30 here, CET? And I believe in about 6 hours, according to what the president is saying of the United States.
Can we go back to the Italian politics?
Yeah. That he is going to have a gathering on the issue of the T word, tariffs, right? And we could get an official announcement. We may not. Mm-hmm. We don't know. We may get it today. We may get it the day after at this moment.
Or never.
Or never.
And that could be my second wish.
Yeah. So, Japan, the United States, EU met yesterday. What was the outcome? What's the readout from that conversation?
First, this decision that might come, or hopefully might not, has nothing to do with national security. We are security partners. We are together in NATO. That's clearly not the basis for the decision. And I know that there is a lively debate, if I can say so, within the American politics and institutions on this decision. We've seen recent decisions, and so and I respect the dynamics of the political debate in the United States now. So for us, it's clear we have a problem of overcapacity we would like to tackle together with the United States, and together with our other partners, Canada, Japan, the others. We would never have protectionist policies. This is not the European way to go. But it's clear we will defend our interests if needs come. Mm-hmm. And you will not get more than that from now. But again, I think we have to keep in mind what I said before.
Yes.
The German Marshall Fund reminds us that the smartest investment the United States made over history probably was the investment on a strong Europe and uniting the transatlantic bond. We have to continue investing in that strong partnership, which is a natural partnership, the most natural partnership we will ever have across the Atlantic. And I can give you two numbers. The European Union, its member states, are the first, by far, trading partner, investment partner of not only the United States, but also of almost every single state in the United States. Huh. So protectionism is not a good idea for the US economy. That's something to keep in mind.
Since you brought up numbers, love that. One of the numbers that those who support, at least the concept of what the current administration would like to do is 2.5% and 10% related to cars and import taxes. What would you say to those who support that idea? Well, you know, the EU, they tax the import of US vehicles, but 10%. the United States only taxes the import of foreign vehicles at 2.5%. How would you counteract that?
My instinct reaction is knowing the American people. It's you like buying, you like consuming, you have the money to do so, and the world offers many good things. Most of them, some of them, are produced out of the United States. It's only natural for the United States to buy outside. And it's only natural for partners to have good trading relationships. That's why we had the TTIP negotiations, by the way, to make our trade even easier and more productive and more beneficial for both. And we wish still that that could be a way to follow, as some in the audience I've seen suggested. For us, that is still the way. Again, we believe in trade. We believe in trade with the United States. We believe in reciprocity. And this is why I say, in case needed, we will protect our interests. But this is not our attitude. Our attitude is to invest in free and fair trade. And we see this as beneficial for the European economy and for the US economy.
So you so well articulated, Madam High Representative, that symbiotic relationship historically and how it is arced to today. If you were to just pick a number out of the sky, out of the air, in terms of how much it needs to be adjusted, this relationship, the pacts, the relationships, how we know each other in a multilateral environment, would it be from 1 to 4? 4, it needs to be changed a lot. 1, it's okay. Where would you put it?
Between the Europeans and the Americans?
Yeah.
Oof. How do you say? 1 is...
1 is a little, 4 is a lot.
I would say 3. No, 3.
3 is a lot,
goes well.
No, 4 means you have to change it a lot.
No,
1 means you do not.
2.
2. Okay, 2. All right.
I'm not good with numbers.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right.
But I can try with ancient Greek if you want.
I'm a journalist. I'm not good with numbers either, so I'm just throwing stuff over.
No, let's say relations are good, which means they could be better, but they could also be worse.
Yeah, no, you're saying
if you ask me in 9 hours, I can give you another.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. You're just saying it's an opportunity, right? There's an opportunity always for improvement. And what I was really drilling in on your answer, because you brought up the idea of localities. As we think about the multilateral to multilateral, right, which is this transatlantic dynamic, to a local, national, local, multilateral, and an example of that, California, depending on how you look at it, we'll just say they're the 7th largest economy in the world. You've heard that before. They've decided to move against what the White House would like to do when it comes to the Paris Agreement. It just names one of the items. If you read the headlines just today, the federal government is suing the state of California on the issue of immigration. And California is saying, that's fine, we're going to do our own thing. When you look at the way the transatlantic relationship is evolving, it becomes much more complex, but also is in the spirit of the way you described it should be.
Let's say that in the relation with the United States, we don't only talk to Washington, we don't only talk to the White House or to the administration, we talk to Congress, but also we talk to, the United States is the biggest democracy on earth. We talk to the United States. So we have institutional relations, but we also talk to cities, states, businesses, communities of different kinds. Also because our people are tied together. It's not just government to government. Our universities work together, our mayors are working together, our companies are working together. So we are interlinked. And for us, it's clear the United States is the United States, all of the country. And that's a dynamic that we see with interest in the United States.
But for you as the EU foreign minister, now you've got a lot of different folks to talk to. And how are you, in this new dynamic, how has that changed the way you've approached your job?
I'm afraid I said it already once, so I can repeat it without without too much danger. Once upon a time, Kissinger was asking, what's the telephone number of Europe? Now we could ask the same question.
Right.
What's the telephone number of the United States? But we have several telephone numbers, and we use them all. That's the serious answer. Obviously, my first interlocutors is Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis on security issues and defense issues, but obviously also the White House, both the president that visited Brussels, vice president that I met several times, Congress a lot, and different stakeholders. It is true, there is a multiplication of contacts, but this might even be an opportunity for us to go beyond Washington and work more and more people to people, as we say. So I think it's, and again, having lived the experience of the fellowship with the German Marshall Fund, I know very well that Washington is different from Utah.
Yes. Slightly, if any of there.
Where I spent 3 wonderful days, by the way.
In Utah?
Spanish Fork, yes.
Fantastic.
It was exciting.
That's great. Did you ski when you're in Utah as well?
No, but I went shooting.
Oh, you're shooting?
Yeah,
oh, good.
It was
good,
interesting.
Good. When's the last time you spoke with Secretary Tillerson?
Some 10 days ago.
10 days ago?
We met, actually, in Kuwait. We were together in Kuwait for the conference to support Iraq.
Yeah.
And to the anti-Daesh coalition meeting. I think it was about 10 days, 10, 15 days.
How's he doing?
Fine, fine. We talked about, Ukraine, Iran, the Middle East peace process, Syria a lot, Iraq. Good. And I saw Secretary Mattis on some Valentine's night. That's nice, huh?
Where?
Yeah, here in Brussels.
Here in Brussels.
We were together at the defense ministers' meeting in NATO.
What
perfect date for a NATO ministerial.
Why not? What conversation stood out to you with Secretary Mattis? What conversation stood out to you?
I think I would say the work we're doing to strengthen the European defense. We have played this very carefully, but very powerfully, I think.
PESCO?
PESCO, but not only, permanent structure cooperation, but also more investments for industrial projects in the field of defense in Europe. I know that for the Americans, it's key to achieve the 2% spending from the European partners. This is a national decision. This is not up to me to take decisions on how much nations spend in defense. But I think we've discussed a lot with Secretary Mattis, and we agreed, he understands this perfectly well, that we as European Union can work on the output gap. I give you 2 numbers. Europeans invest in defense 50% of what the United States invests in defense, but our output is 15%. If you want to fill in that gap, which is the gap on the output on operational capabilities, that is what the European Union can do, because we can exercise the leverage of the economy of scale. So the same amount of money spent, more outcome. And this is what is interesting for the militaries in the end, that you have allies that have good capabilities and that spend in a smart manner. This is what we're doing on the European level, strengthening NATO. Because at the end of the day, you invest in capabilities that are at the disposal of member states, that are also NATO allies, that can be used in European Union, NATO, or UN operations. So this is, I think, what we discussed the most, what he understood the most, and I think this is why we have seen clear support from NATO to the European defense.
You saw the headlines after the 2 of you came to the microphones and issued your statements in December. You have spoken with Secretary Tillerson since. When you
I was dressed in black. I'm always dressed in black. Let me tell you.
The idea that you have articulated to us, transatlanticism, do you believe you have a friend in Secretary Tillerson from your perspective of what that is?
Sure. Not only in him, and many in Washington. I've been visiting Washington now many times since the beginning of the new administration, which is not new anymore, and we've always had good meetings. We don't agree on everything, and our points of disagreement are quite clear. And I think it's a sign of maturity in the partnership, in the friendship, to be very frank and sincere and open and candid about the things on which we disagree. But I would say 90% of the issues, we're tackling them together. You take Syria, you take DPRK, you take counterterrorism, you take many, Ukraine I mentioned. So many things we're doing together to work on Africa. Our agenda is still a common agenda.
What has surprised you in the last year?
I'm getting used to it.
Yeah, take your
that
pick, right?
I
But you only
can't
pick
say.
one. You only pick one. But what has surprised you in the last year?
It's not related to politics. Can I?
Yep.
That Italy was excluded from the World Football Championship.
Okay, all right. That could be seen as political by some. But now let's get into the realm of politics. What has surprised you in the transatlantic alliance?
I wouldn't say. Well, maybe the move to Jerusalem, the move of the embassy to Jerusalem. Because I think this exposes the US to some risks and to the potential, let's say, risk of losing credibility in brokering an agreement. And I would say that this surprised me probably the most. But maybe it's just because it's the most recent.
It's the most recent. Again, staying within the theme of this conference, is your thought that the EU needs the US more or the US needs the EU more?
Both. I have no doubt about that. I told you about the numbers.
Is it equal?
We are together, US, EU, more than 50% of GDP globally. We are together 30% of trade flows globally. And this is interlinked. You take out one side, the other side loses, and vice versa. So whatever we do to diminish or weaken this link, we're both going to suffer. So it's a lose-lose or win-win. The more we invest in our relationship, the more win-win we get. The more we put it in danger or we weaken it, the more we both lose. I think we both need each other in different fields, probably, but that's, to me, absolutely clear. We equally need each other.
Are we going to have a trade war?
I hope not. I think it would be a real disaster for both.
Yeah.
And for the rest of the world, it could be a disaster, because, as I said, we are together 30% of global trade. And the world doesn't need that. The world economy doesn't need it. The US economy doesn't need it. The European economy doesn't need it. We don't want it, and we will not have it. As I said, we're ready to defend our interests, but the trade war is not definitely our mindset. We're not there.
Should the EU react? Should the president this evening come out with the 25, the 10, plus?
We will.
Yeah.
If needed, we will, sure. We need to defend our interests. But our attitude is not, will never be, and has never been a protectionist attitude. We believe in free trade. And we prove it with good agreements with Canada, with Japan, with others in the world. We not only believe in free trade, but we benefit from free trade, as well as I believe America has benefited from free trade. I still think we're on the same side. If you take America, I think we're on the same side here. We believe it's good.
So one of the questions I asked during YPS, again, the Young Professional Summit, was, what leader stands out to you as that representative that could achieve what we're talking about, right? Strategies in an age of distrust, right? And this idea that we must, again, review, reboot, and rebuild. Who stands out to you in North America that goes, that's...
Next.
Okay. I tried.
No comment.
I tried.
No comment.
No comment. Gotcha. So, were you at Davos this year? At Davos this year?
I was not there, not this year.
You, and I think most folks in this room would like this, for the first time, they had 3 days of programming specifically devoted to the idea of gender equity. And on top of that, they released some information about a report that shows it will take over 200 years for economic parity for women. Only 200 years.
In average in the world, or
all
in some
women?
specific?
Yeah,
okay.
all women. As you look at this very day that we get to sit here on red chairs, no less, what is your thought about what the future is to achieve that? And what are some of the levers that could be employed, not only in culture, in government, but also in business?
I'll surprise you probably. I think one of the leverages would be parental leave for fathers.
Paternity leave, right?
Paternal leave.
Why?
How much time do we have?
We'll go for it.
Not much. Because we still live in the mentality, both in business and in the administration, that children are mother's business, which obviously is true as much as they are father's business. Mm-hmm. But as long as this mentality is there, it will always be somehow risky or perceived as risky for someone that has to employ or promote a woman in private or public sector to consider that angle. If you have equal parental leave for mothers and fathers, this problem disappears.
How do you explain this dynamic personally to children?
I have 2 daughters, so I'm fine. But seriously, I think the other indispensable investment would be this, to not so much to work with women on women parity, but to work with men. I dream of a moment when 8th of March is mainly men advocating and celebrating women parity, and women can just do their own work and business as all the other days. But men take care of the parity issue.
Well, we got one at least here, yes, absolutely. I want to finish by asking in a hopeful way, in a way of solution and steps moving forward, an action plan, practicality, how you would explain why the transatlantic relationship and alliance and dynamic is important. And how would you describe that to a 20-something in Europe?
To a 20-something in Europe, first you have to switch off the phone, stop the music, and wave a little bit.
That's like me. What do you mean? Or everybody in this room, for that matter.
I think it's still commonality of values and interests. That's it. And I think 20 years old people in Europe, as well as in the United States, feel that we are the same. Our culture is the same, the music we listen to is the same, the movies we watch are the same, we believe in the same values, we want more or less to build the same kind of life. That's why I say it's a natural partnership.
Right.
Because really it's difficult to find the differences. We have differences, but we also have differences inside Europe. We belong to the same world somehow. Politics might shift, but the people are on the same side.
Guess what? We've got 2 minutes, 3 minutes for some questions from our conferees here. And I think we have microphones around here. And if you could keep your questions to 15 seconds, I'd really love that.
Wow.
I don't have a mic
and then
here.
I answer yes or no.
And then answer yes
Great.
or no. Let me grab a mic from somebody. Oh, here we go. Thank you so much. Mr. Clemens?
Thank you, Madam High Commissioner. Bob Kagan issued a kind of challenge, I think, to European leaders. And if they want to save the global liberal order, they need to face down illiberalism inside Europe. What do you think is possible on that front, responding back to Bob Kagan?
Indeed. I think we both need to face challenges to our values, both in the United States and in Europe. We're doing our part, and I guess the United States are doing their part as well.
I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Martin Center here in Brussels. There is a team in the External Action Service called eStratcom, and I think they're doing great work countering Russian information warfare. Now, they've come under a pretty unfair attack in the Netherlands. Why can't anyone from your staff defend them on Dutch television? I mean, I did it late January, and I think I was the only one in Brussels.
But my staff is sitting there, so I turn to them the question, that's clear. But we are not only publicly, but also legally, as far as I know.
And very unfortunately, we are at the end of the session. And I just want to thank Richard, but I especially want to thank the High Representative Federica Mogherini.
Thank you, sir.